Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Monday session of the PAR. So, an exciting change for the books. I will declare the meeting open. It's just on 2 o'clock, and call for any apologies, please. Councillor Ryan.
I believe Councillor Blackwell's an apology if that hasn't already been put in.
I wasn't aware of that, but thank you for that. So, can I have somebody second that, please? Seconded by Deputy Mayor Halale. All those in favour? Against, thank you. That's carried and noted. I'll now just ask, are there any declarations of interest, please? No, and if not, we will move on to agenda item 3.1, being the procurement update. That's on page 6 of the meeting today. And Jo, did you want to introduce that at all? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Simon. So just to say, so this is Angela Murray's first time in the chamber here at Waitaki, but Angela has joined Waitaki with an extensive 40+ years in the procurement area, including many within councils. So she joined us in late August as our procurement advisor in the continuous improvement team, and we're very much looking forward to achieving the priority outcomes for council of strengthening procurement processes and standards to empower us to have our best value for money. So I'm going to hand over to Angela so she can talk to her report.
The report is purely based on sort of 3 weeks of desktop work, because that's as long as I've been here. The first section of the report, I was looking at the over 10,000 procurements and the way that they were procuring. And then the second part of the report is really just an overview of some of the things that I need to delve into in greater detail. So just going to hand over the report. And if there's any questions.
Thank you. So before I ask any questions, do any of the other PAR members have any questions or comments they'd like to raise? Councillor McKine.
Yeah, hello and welcome. And just questions, please. So you've got categories here of non-standard, standard and compliant. Could you just explain how each of those categories is detailed?
So a standard procurement would be where you go out to open market. A non-standard procurement would be where you actually you may only go to two suppliers, or three suppliers, or less, or direct appointment. Sorry, what was the third thing?
Oh, that was just the three.
So I guess, John, that kind of segues quite nicely into a couple of questions that I have, right? So if I and I caught up with Angela and Richard this morning on this, but if I look at this and I go, okay, we've had 128 contracts, or 124 contracts above 10K that mean that they've got to go through this process. Of those 124 contracts, 98 were non-standard, 24 are still under inspection, and only 2 hit the mark. Right, that suggests one of a couple of things, right? It either suggests that our staff aren't complying with the standard procurement processes, which I don't believe for a minute, because I think that by the very fact that they're signed off by senior management and peer reviewed, people are doing what they should be doing. So the alternative to that is that the procurement policy that we've got at the moment isn't fit for purpose. And an example of that would be what Angela was just discussing, where she said, procurement policy says you must go out for anything over $10,000 and get 3 tenders. Well, some of the stuff that we do in this community, there's not 3 people that can tender for it. So that makes it inappropriate. Some of the policy that we're currently working with says if you go out to a $10,000 or above value contract for tender, and then you decide that you need to extend it 3 months, you should go out and re-tender for it. Well, that's just not practical in sensible terms if somebody's 3/4 of the way through digging a hole and they just need to finish it off. So the question that I had for Angela and Richard before is, if it's not fit for purpose, well, firstly, we need to make sure that people are doing the right thing and following the right process, and I think that we can get confidence in that in the next while. But secondly, if it's not fit for purpose, you'll see the second part of the review where Angela's kind of laying out, well, okay, the focus for the next 6 to 9 months will be learning the business and building foundations. Well, we don't have time to do all of that if we've got procurement going on throughout the process. So we need to identify some, not quick wins, but some ways that we can improve some of the processes relatively quickly so that we don't get this kind of alarm bell of, well, hang on a minute, 2% of our contracts above $10,000 meet the standard procurement, So I'll hand back to Angela to kind of speak to that a little bit more, but that was something that we were discussing this morning.
Yeah, so one of the things I was looking at was that where you've got the column where you've got number of compliant non-standard procurements, 98 people actually did follow the proper procedures. And the reasons that they gave for non-standard procurements were correct. But that means that 98 times they had to go to somebody else, a manager, and get that approved. Whereas, and because you've got that 10,000 level, you're actually pushing them through churn that they probably don't need to be doing. I was looking at, and I've been in touch with a number of other sort of sister councils, and the level that we're actually set at is fairly low. A lot of them are more around the 50,000 mark.
Yeah.
So that's what's sort of driving this behaviour.
Yeah. So Angela was telling me this morning that the procurement policy as a whole is up for renewal and will return to the PAR
March next year.
in March of next year. But with the support of the current PAR members, I think there's some things that we could be doing in the interim that might help improve that. For example, you could have a best endeavours of 3 tenders, up to, I don't know, 20 or 30 or $40,000 or whatever, but as soon as you hit that mark, actually, no, this is 3 tenders, or if it's a 3-month rollover extension of an existing contract, then we could do that. But rather than solution it here and now, those were just some ideas that I had. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, eminently sensible suggestions. The only problem I think is that I'm not sure that we have delegated authority to approve amendments to the procurement policy. The best we could do would be to recommend to the new council something that it implements, let's say, as its first meeting or something of the sort.
Absolutely. I wouldn't for a moment feel empowered to be able to make such decisions, Councillor Hopkins.
I do apologise for pedantry.
I know, I need to apologise at all here. Further questions? Mayor Kircher.
I'll say that again.
Pardon?
For those who didn't hear that, with the 1.1 million spending on roading, I just wanted to know, was any of that coming from depreciation, and if so, did those projects get run past the roading subcommittee as per the delegations?
Who'd like to put their hand up for that one? Richard.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. In this round of testing, we did not test for that. We were looking more for compliance with the procurement policy. We didn't specifically delve into that, but we certainly can.
Excellent, thank you. Does that answer you? Well, it doesn't answer your question, Gary, but
I look forward to the response. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, I'm very glad that other members of the committee have raised the matter of the non-standard procurements. And the explanations are persuasive and less spectacular and or dramatic than those who want to populate the front pages of newspapers might wish. But I am curious to know why such an enormously high percentage of the roading contracts were non-standard. There were 31 in total. 28 of them were non-standard, and obviously, one was standard and 2 were requiring further analysis, but the figure of 28 still seems to be extraordinarily high.
I think it's, I mean, it is a high number, but they're all high numbers. You know, if you look at economic development,
No, I accept that.
4 out of 4 were, and 7 out of 8 of the parks and
Yeah.
rec.
No, I
But
accept.
I mean, if the question's specific to roading, then there may be a simple answer.
Well, I just to explain, I was going to raise the question of the number of non-standard procurements with respect to water, property, parks and rec, and property, but I felt that the percentages of those that were non-standard perhaps was lower. And I mean, essentially 100% of the roading contracts are non-standard, and that's a lot.
Yeah, so I guess to the point that I was just making, though, Jim, almost 100% of all of the other ones are as well. It's just that there's only 4 of them. So 4 out of 4 and 2 out of 2 and 1 out of 1. Right? They're all.
Well, I was just looking at big numbers.
Yes, you were looking at the and they do attract the eye. But I think that was the point that we were making early on, is that this isn't just specific to one area. Somebody's not awarding a whole lot of roading contracts to their cousin, or this is not happening. There's something about
Yes.
the policy that means that across the board, whether it's 4, 1 or 31, we're having these issues. But Angela, Richard, if you want to add to that and talk specifically to a couple of Jim's high-level ones.
A lot of the reasons given around it being a non-standard procurement were things like, as was mentioned, a carry on from an existing contract where you've already got a contractor working in a certain area, and it makes more sense for them to do the next bit of work rather than shut up shop and then bring someone else in. So there wasn't anything particularly peculiar about the reasons they were giving.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Halale.
Yeah, no, thank you and welcome, Angela. Oh, that was what my comment was as well, around probably an idea or a deeper dive around the number of variations. You know, like you'd have the life of a contract that would be coming to an end, the expiry date, and then you need to finish the job, or having to review the terms and the conditions of a particular, you know, like contract. So I think maybe just in the narrative, it would be helpful just to give the context of things. Also, just the difference just between, like we say, non-standard, but it actually means the direct sourcing or closed tender. So we're not opening it up to the wide market, because we really needed to get a particular job done or a project done in a quick time to get a good outcome for the community. So I think just the broader outcomes as well, when we're doing the procurement framework and the plan, is helpful just for the community, just to be aware of. So I think just the context is helpful, just to help people with their understanding. Thank you. And then, yeah, no, that's all.
Councillor Mackay.
I'm finding this intriguing and it's great, so thank you for doing all this, but I do notice down the bottom you said in addition there's an additional 1.8 of spend. That's a third of the total spend for those 2 months. So and in my world that's also part of the procurement. So could that be included next time as well? You know, we've still got to pay for it, so it's a payment. So therefore we're procuring something. So could we actually itemise that? Because you know, we're talking a third of the expenditure, so it'd be nice to see where that's going.
Yeah, it can be identified. The point that I was trying to make was that it actually isn't governed by the policy of, like, if you're buying Microsoft licenses, you don't go out to the market to get 3 quotes for Microsoft licenses. So, and legal fees, they're all things that you really don't have a lot of sway on being able to go and find other people to do those things. So I was just calling out that additional spend.
Yes, I think it's.
But I guess.
But it does. You do raise a good point. I had exactly the same note myself, and I had circled payments to government and digital licenses, and you know, why are they not? But to your point, Angela, if it's Microsoft Office, it's Microsoft Office. But I guess if it was software, or a new software upgrade or the replacement of a financial system or something, then that's definitely something that we'd want to see tendered
Yes,
or
definitely.
know about. So even
Yeah.
to Hannah's point, when we look at this going forward, being able to get that a little bit of context around there is handy. Legal fees are different depending on whether they're legal fees that we just have day in, day out, or whether it's for a specific case that we have. But I think it's really useful information. Roger.
Thank you. I know legal fees are probably covered by all of government procurement terms, which we get preferential rates on. Just wonder whether there's any other all of government procurement options contained within these.
I think we're signed up to 8 or 9 different all of government contracts. I haven't got the detail here, but I can bring that to the next half. It's of interest.
Yeah, look, thank you.
Yeah.
Did you have another question, Jim?
Only one to you, Mr. Chair. You foreshadowed that you thought that we could take some provisional or temporary steps to amend the policy or recommend to others to amend it. Do you have a resolution to put to us?
Well, I think I probably do.
Well then, may I move that you move?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to check whether there's any more questions or any more feedback from anybody at this point in time. But if not, to your point, Councillor Hopkins, I would like to propose a resolution that we acknowledge all the good work that's gone on here, and that we, as a committee, recommend that some changes get thought of and taken to the new council. Once it forms to basically look at how we can potentially make the process more efficient without increasing the risk, either the reputational risk or the financial risk associated with it going forward.
That's a very long recommendation, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to second it with rather than thought of and taken forward, just changes proposed to the new council for their consideration with implementation before Christmas 2025.
That is far more eloquent and succinct than I could have pulled together.
I'm happy to second that.
You're happy to second to your own edited motion? Thank you. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried. And I'd now like to just move that we accept the report that's been presented to us today. Could I have somebody move that? Moved by Councillor Ryan, seconded by Deputy Mayor Halale. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried. And thank you, Angela, Richard, and welcome, Angela. Okay, so that brings us on to agenda item 3.2, the memorandum on the risk management update. And I'd like Victoria to come forward. Again, Joe, do you want to introduce this?
Yes, certainly. Excuse me. So in relation to the risk report, not a great deal has moved from the last assessment, but it is very exciting to say that we have a new risk advisor who has joined us and will be doing a full review and assessment of the risks that council has in place. I'll hand over to Victoria and Ken.
Good afternoon, councillors. It's a great pleasure to introduce Ken Palabar, who's our new Risk and Assurance Advisor. Day 1 today, so a big day, but straight into it. Yes. So Ken brings local government and public health sector experience in the risk assurance and quality space. So we're really excited to have him on board. So just in relation to the report, the Q3 update shows positive progress in council's risk profile. The most significant improvement being the reduction of very high risks from 4 to 3, with the externally managed council water supplies risk moving from very high to high, following the signing of a formal agreement with Corridale Water Management Limited. So while challenges still remain, particularly around central government regulatory change in the water space, the overall trend shows that council is making steady progress in managing its risk exposure effectively. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, I have, well, I'm not sure if it's a question or a suggestion, but I question the continued inclusion of climate change as a very high risk. And I question it predicated on the reasons for us including it as very high in our risk assessment. And the reason we say it's very high is the risk that the negative impacts of climate change are more severe or difficult to manage as a result of council inaction and lack of understanding or strategy, etc. I won't read all the rest. In my view, we have actually implemented a range of strategies across the board and funding for coastal erosion. There are new flood identification zones in the district plan and steps taken to ensure mitigation of adverse effects there. The one thing that I think the risk register could include, in addition to the climate change declaration, the water sensitive urban design principles which are included in the proposed plan, there's a high level climate change risk, Canterbury Climate Change Partnership. I personally believe that one of the things we should include as a strategy or a control is a timetable program for the management of potential flooding at Muddy Creek, because the biggest potential risk to actual people in actual houses in the actual district is in the north of Oamaru. And it's the one thing that the strategy is silent on. And I believe it should be included and it should be brought to the attention of for the consideration of the new council. But that said, I would personally, if that amendment were included, I think it could be a high risk, but not a very high one.
Thank you. I think we've spoken about it in the past, and I would have to respectfully disagree with you on that call. And I would there's a couple of reasons why I say that. One is that almost every council in New Zealand has it as a very high risk, and in fact, it was one of the shortcomings that was observed in the review of local councils and local council audits was that people weren't taking it significantly enough. Now, that's not enough reason on its own, but I think if you spoke to the mayor of Bulla or if you spoke to the mayor of the East Coast, they would have climate change risk as very high on all of their risk registers, and perhaps we've just had good luck or fortune to this point in time. But I'm happy to take other people's advice on board, but I would be reluctant to see it reduced as a risk. I think your comment around controls and additional controls and strategy are absolutely valid.
Well, I have no wish to argue with you, but the particular reason why I challenge the fact that it's a very high risk is our raison d'etre for that classification. And I repeat, the reason we say it is a very high risk is that the negative impacts of climate change are more severe or difficult to manage as a result of council inaction and lack of understanding or strategy. Now, my point is, I do not believe that the impacts of climate change here will be worse for those reasons. I accept that they could be and will be a very high risk should they manifest as predicted by some, but not as a result of inaction, inactivity, or failure to develop strategies on our part.
Absolutely understood and appreciated. And maybe Victoria and Ken, that would be a good thing for you to sink your teeth into. As part of your coming on board, is to help understand and explain to us why it is where it is. I know you've joined us from Waimate, and so they're all over climate change up that way. You'll probably have some great pieces of advice and understanding that you can bring to it. But I take your point, Jim. If we could work it a little better, then we should. Yeah.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. You're sitting beside two people who were born in Waimate. We take offence at that, don't we, Jim?
Do we? Yes.
I was being genuine.
No, in all seriousness, I think the challenge we have, we can have a strategy, but it's not going to change the risk level. So I think we need to understand that, because whatever the strategy does to build in more resilience and so on, we will never be resilient enough to to deal with cyclones and that really heavy type of weather that's affected those other places you've mentioned. So I think it's Yeah, we should have a strategy, absolutely. It should talk about resilience and adaptability. But yeah, I can't see any way it would move off a high risk.
No, absolutely, I agree, but I think Councillor Hopkins makes a good point about perhaps some of the wording behind the rationale of why it's there rather than it being there for a start. But thank you. Any other questions or comments on that specific point, Rebecca? Oh no, so in general.
Just on the operational risk events, could you explain the threshold there? It's none of the OIs logged met the threshold. Yeah, just curious what threshold is and I guess if it's set appropriately.
Sure. So with the risk management policy, it documents the thresholds in the appendix. So essentially, we've got quite a low appetite for risk. So anything above medium is classified as being out of appetite. So this is around things like people, process, systems, external risks. So essentially, these are owned by the managers and leads, and when they get to that point, they are reported up into SMT, and then through to here. If that.
Yeah. So at the
That's
PAR, at the PAR a few PARs ago, we looked because remember we used to get several pages of these coming through to us from top to bottom. And one of the things that Amelia proposed and that we as a committee supported was that below that certain threshold, they would be assigned to SMT or ELT to look at. And I think that that's absolutely the right decision. But your question is more around what is that? And I said to Victoria and Ken this morning, for me, getting a sentence in here under operational risk events that says none of the OREs logged in this quarter meet the threshold for reporting to the committee, that doesn't quite give me the comfort that I need to be satisfied that they have met the threshold. And so I've asked for them to consider being able to bring something along that says, there were 15 medium or 7 of this and 8 of that, and they were assigned to X, Y, and Z, and these people have signed off on it. I think that would make me feel a little bit better about it. Does that answer you?
Yes, yeah.
Great, thank you. Did I see another hand up somewhere? No, Roger. Thank you. Councillor Hopkins has moved the recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Councillor McCone, all those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried, and thank you, Victoria, and welcome, Ken. All right, after that, we'll jump straight into agenda item 3.3, financial summary to 31 August, and I'll invite Amanda to speak to this unless Paul wants to introduce it at all.
No, thank you.
Amanda, the mic is yours.
Okay, so this is the financial update for the 2 months of July and August, the first 2 months of the 26th financial year. It's just the light update because you'll get the full quarterly one probably November, the first PAR committee meeting. So in terms of the overall result, we're sitting about where we budgeted to be with a budgeted loss of circa 400K. Operating revenue is higher than budget, largely because we received higher than expected NZTA roading claims. So that's all dependent on the amount of work that happens the month prior, and then we subsequently get that refunded from NZTA. So when we budget that, it can be quite different to budget based on when the work actually gets performed. And then there's this offsetting variance in expenditure. We have higher costs in other expenses. The same sort of thing with the budget. We just divide it by 12 months, a lot of the standard expenditure, but we have incurred a lot more in the first 2 months. And so that should even out over the course of the year. The balance sheet, I did note that the annual report's coming up and it's still in progress. So we haven't actually closed out the 25 financial year yet. So because we don't have that starting position at 1 July 25 finalised, the balance sheet is not quite perfect at the moment, and there'll be some changes between, like, for example, we're working through the fixed assets, and some of them could be capitalised to the balance sheet or they might be expensed. So we haven't quite perfected that yet, which is still a work in progress, which we'll talk about further in the annual report. But in terms of the balance sheet, we have spent about 4 million on capital expenditure for the year to date, largely on those big projects that were spanning balance date, the Network Waitaki Events Centre, Forester Gallery and Kakanui Bridge. Cash is sitting healthy and our borrowings hasn't moved, but we will look to borrow in October as our capital program starts to increase.
Thanks, Amanda. Any questions before I, Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Just for the probably as much a matter of public information and understanding as anything, these revaluations you reference that have pushed our assessments up 20 million, is that the Valuation NZ 3-yearly thing? Is that what's generated that?
So we revalue our roading assets, infrastructure every year, and we also value our land and buildings every 3 years. So both of those valuations happened at 30 June 25. So we're in the process of finalising those right now. And whatever that value is, that affects what our depreciation will be set at for the 26 financial year. So that's what I've just mentioned. Because we haven't finalised those valuations, those final figures of our assets, we haven't worked out exactly what our depreciation will be each month.
Well, okay, so that reference, depreciation are currently on track against budget, but will increase once the revaluations are booked because the valuation increases were 20 million higher than budgeted for. Is that our valuations in both cases with regard to roading and property? It's not an external agency.
We have them independently valued. Both roading and land and buildings has been independently valued at 30 June 25.
Which we do always.
No, but I had just assumed it was part of that 3-yearly cycle that impacts the rates, and what you've told me is it's different from that. So I've learned something. Thank you very much.
Well, and the roading is annual. It's the buildings and land that are 3-yearly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, it's the value. We've valued our council-owned land and buildings. So this building that we're sitting in right now, all of our assets that the council owns. It's not individual residential properties for rating purposes. It's not that valuation.
So the tricky thing here, Jim, is that, and you'll note for both this and the next section that we look at, compared to the material that we've historically been used to receiving in part, it's a bit light on some of the content, and that goes to sort of what Amanda was talking about before. We haven't been able to close out the annual report yet, and that's primarily just because we've got a finance team that's under a fair bit of pressure and constraint at the moment, and haven't been able to get everything done that they would have normally done or like to have done by this time of year. So because we can't close a couple of things out, we can't lock in a couple of things that we need to open. And while none of us like that, it's just a reflection of the constrained environment that we're operating in at the moment. But Amanda's trying the best that she can to highlight through these sections what it's looking like for right now. Councillor McKay. So was it a supplementary before we?
Well, it's a different matter. I just want to confirm there's a reference in the Treasury policy to a reference in this report, I should say, to LGA. It is expected that LGFA borrowing will be required during October 2025. Now, I think in one of the subsequent reports, that may be the Treasury one, there's a reference to a need to borrow 10 million. Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
So we can talk to that 10 million in the Treasury policy when we get to it.
Yes.
But you're absolutely right. That is the figure that is made reference to here, Councillor McKay.
Yeah, I know it's a bugbear and everything with the revaluations, but can we challenge these on buildings and everything else? And basing that, what are we valuing them at? Are we valuing it at replacement or current sale day to day? So, if we're valuing on replacement, the cost is huge, but the current value of what they're actually worth is a different number.
We value them at optimized depreciated replacement cost, which is industry standard. So it's comparable with how all other councils do it. So it takes into account the depreciation of it as well. So what it's worth. Yeah, not what we could sell for right now.
Yeah, so and again, in the next section of 3.4, there's a reference to it at the bottom of the page there, so I'd quite like to just tease that out slightly more when we get to it as well. Any further questions with regard to 3.3, the financial summary?
Thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a reference to the external borrowings remaining relatively static at 73 million. What was the level expected to be at this stage? And between, you know, what I guess the other part of that is what is the amount that we've rated for as far as interest costs, and you know, with interest costs going down, with us borrowing a bit less perhaps, is there an ability to bank those savings, make sure that they go towards those projects which the rates were collected for? So I'm not expecting exact answers or anything like that. It's just the principles overall.
Yeah, so so the starting point for budgeting your borrowing is your CapEx requirements. So what we intended to spend on all our significant additions throughout the year. And where we can, we try to plan that, like the event centre and the gallery. We know that that's the bulk of that's going to happen this first 6 months of the financial year and not so much the second half. So yeah, we try to coincide the borrowing with when we expect the capital expenditure is going to occur. And then kind of for the rest of it, you space it out throughout the year because it's all based on resourcing and availability. But it has been quite, it's behind budget at the moment because we are getting all our ducks in a line before we go out to tender and things for a lot of capital projects. So that's why it's behind. So if the capital expenditure is behind, then our borrowing's behind. So we're not paying as much interest as we budgeted to. I think the interest rate is similar to what we budgeted in the long-term plan, given we just set it 2 months ago. But yes, any savings there, like we're trying to really tightly rein in our borrowing. So any extra cash that we've got, we're putting it towards repaying debt as much as possible. And we're holding off as long as we can. So we haven't borrowed in July or August as planned. We're holding off to October, and then we'll do a slightly bigger one there because we'll probably have quite a hump of capital expenditure there. So yeah, any savings we make in these few months will go towards the CapEx in the later months.
That answers your question. Yeah, I think it's tricky. I remember when the par a couple ago where we were looking at the figures and we'd borrowed significantly less than we said that we were going to borrow, and we were looking at a declining interest rate environment, but our interest rate costs were still much higher than I would have expected them to be in terms of savings against budget. And the rationale that you gave me at the time was, and it makes sense, is that if you'd forecast that you were going to be borrowing your money evenly throughout the 12-month period, then you'd be paying interest evenly throughout the 12-month period. But for the last financial year, we front-loaded a lot of the debt that we needed to borrow, and then we had the observatory pay down, which started to see us have the benefit. But we'd borrowed a lot earlier than we'd planned on doing. I guess this is the exact reverse of that, where we're going to be borrowing significantly later than we'd planned on, and so we're not taking up the mortgage until halfway through the year. And to Gary's point, we just need to make sure that we bank any of those savings against the projects that they were forecast to be spent against, so that they get the benefit of the delay. And you've said absolutely that they will. Any further questions on 3.3? If not, then can I ask somebody move that we accept it, please? Moved by Councillor McCone, seconded by Mayor Kircher. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried. And Amanda, while you have the talking stick, do you want to go straight into 3.4, the draft annual report? And I understand that this will also, because it's a public agenda item, will be made available online after the event, and for the members in the gallery, we have a copy down the back for them now. But Amanda, to you, please.
Okay, so this is the very first draft of the annual report. A version was circulated last week. You'll note there's still a few highlighted line items in it that I discussed on the previous item as well, principally around property, plant and equipment. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to work out whether an asset is an asset or whether it needs to be moved over to expenditure and those sorts of things, and making sure that we are itemising them all correctly so that they're depreciated exactly as they should. The annual audit began last week at the same time as we've been trying to pull all this together. And so this is where we're sitting right now, but we will be sending another complete version of the annual report as soon as it's available, hopefully within the week. So in terms of the financial results, they haven't really shifted from when we discussed them back in July, Power Committee. We budgeted a profit of 7 million, and then there was a slight deficit at the end of the year. Revenue was lower than expected because of $4 million worth of less grants and subsidies, largely to do with NZTA subsidies because those roading projects were cancelled or deferred earlier on in the year. And then we had significantly higher depreciation, which is also what we touched on previously and that had been mentioned throughout the year, and slightly higher personnel costs than expected. In terms of the balance sheet, we had that early repayment from Observatory Village back in February, and that went to repay debt. And we also had less debt because of there was about $20 million worth of capital projects that we deferred back in December. We took it out of the 25 year and it's now going to occur in 26 and later years. So the only real change from what I presented back in July is that we're working on booking the valuations. And I've noted here that it's probably going to be about a $50 million increase. We were budgeting at around 29-30 mil. So that's where I said how it's about $20 million higher in the previous report. And that will affect our depreciation going forward. But yeah, there's nothing else to report in the annual report at this point. I can keep you briefed on anything we get from the auditors over the next few weeks, and we're looking to pull this all together and adopt the annual report as soon as possible, as close to the legislative deadline of 31 October as possible. It will likely be the day of the first council meeting on the 4th of November.
Thank you. So just for those people who have a copy of the draft report or are looking at the draft report, if I go, for example, Amanda, to the second page, we were talking about the message from the Mayor, and we've got areas that are highlighted in the draft. Those are the areas that are still going to be, that still have significant updating to happen to them.
Yeah, so everywhere there's a highlight throughout it, it needs touched up. So probably the front half of it is pretty much there. Things like that section of the Mayor and Chief Executive's report, that's referring to the surplus. We've left that highlighted because we don't have a final surplus figure yet. That's going to change once we've confirmed depreciation. And then in the finances, it is basically the property, plant and equipment, intangibles and depreciation that's still to come. But those affect some other line items like gains and losses on sale and equity. And then the consolidated results don't come until October either. That's when all our subsidiaries, their legislative deadline is 30 September. So they're currently getting audited. Hopefully they'll all sign off tomorrow. And we'll get all their final results, consolidate that in, provide that to the auditors on the 6th of October, and that'll all be there after that date.
Thank you. So hoping by the end of the week that we'll be able to provide an update that's got property, plant and equipment in it for a second draft. We're looking to provide that to the auditors slightly earlier if we can. And then the consolidated version, 6th of November, 6th of October. And then we've commented in here that in the draft annual report that we'll look to lodge it early November.
Yeah, so the legislative deadline is 31 October. There's currently no meeting scheduled to be able to meet that deadline. So it'll happen when the new council begins its first meeting on the 4th of November at
Yes,
this
and-
stage, if it's
and
audited,
so-
to adopt an audited annual report.
Yeah, so we're accepting that we're going to miss that legislative deadline. It's I guess just something to be expected when we go through the 3-yearly cycle. I've spoken to some independents, and certainly there are several other councils out there that are doing exactly the same thing. And it makes sense for us to wait to sign this off for the new council to form, given the timing of when we have to put the control development pieces in together. Councillor McCone, you had something?
Oh, it's just more of a comment, well, not a question, more than anything on the drafting of plan. It's on page 14 of what we've been given. The current ratio of assets to liabilities, I heard you mention a bit before that, but is that basically buildings, roads and water infrastructure are assets? That's what we listed. And the other comment I make, and I'm hoping that it's because we've got so much capital money going through, is if average rates per rateable property as opposed to average expenditure per rateable property is almost $3,000 in overspend. But I'm hoping that's the capital cost money drifting in and out of the account, or is that actual?
Yeah, so in terms of the assets over liabilities, it's all of our total assets. So principally our infrastructure, all our capital, absolutely everything that council owns, but also we have like loans to other entities, cash, everything. And so these are all highlighted at the moment because we're waiting on those final numbers. Obviously, we don't have our assets number in there yet. And yeah, rates per rateable property is the income that we receive, and then the cost is the actual cost. That's everything, the capital and operating costs that we spend on each property.
So I suppose what I'm asking is, once we tick off the stadium, the forest gallery, the bridge, that are big capital expenditure items, that number should drop.
Yeah, we do have some big capital items going through the long-term plan. If you recall, our CapEx still stays pretty high over the course of the long-term plan with the upcoming Three Waters work that's required. It's recognizing as well that like those numbers there, around 40% of our income is from other sources as well. So NZTA pays a significant portion of our roading infrastructure, things like that. Grants and subsidies have paid for a lot of our event centre, half of our event centre, and then the bulk of the Forester Gallery. So yeah, it's recognising that rates income is not the sole income source for all our costs.
Would UAGCs be included in that rates figure, or would they be separate as well?
I think they would be included.
Thank you, Amanda. And I guess just going back to the point that Councillor McCone raised earlier at the bottom of page 15 of the PAR agenda, I note in there that we're saying under the revaluations that land and buildings were last revalued 30 June 2022 and have increased in value by around 55 million or 35% of their value since that time. I'd love to get more of a breakdown from the valuers on it. It's just that looking at my own property, I would be stoked if it had increased by 35% value over that same period of time.
Oh, so I was going to ask or comment on exactly the same thing, but I guess it's the totality of our land and buildings. Fascinatingly enough, roading assets have actually gone down 5.6 million, according to the information on page 15 of our PAR committee report. But when I look at page 2, the document, the page signed by Alex and Gary, there's a reference there to our roading assets have also been revalued and increased in value by 2.318 million since they were revalued last year. So what is it? Down by 5.6 or up by 2.3?
Well, I looked at that bit that you're talking about and said that there was a highlighted section and the numbers weren't right.
Yeah, that's
And that when we were talking before, Jim, about the draft annual report, and I asked specifically around the areas that were highlighted, and I spoke to that piece under the mayor's report, you'll note that piece with all the numbers in is absolute. So I took from that those numbers weren't correct.
those numbers at the front there are last year's. So
If
last
we,
year
if,
we had
if we,
that
if we'd made an $18.28
down again.
million loss, given I thought that we'd made a $7 million profit, I would be a bit surprised. So, yeah, so that highlighted section,
Yeah.
I'm taking as a grain of salt.
Just one other very quick question then in relation to the draft. Is it premature to say it won't be done by, I've listened to what you've said and I accept the timeframes and the timetabling you've identified. But is it premature at the end of September to say that we're not going to meet the 31 October deadline? Whereas this document says this timeframe was not met and consequently council is in breach of this legislative requirement. I mean,
So I'll get Paul just to take us through at a very high level the timeline of what needs to happen and when and why we think now. No, I think no, it's a good question, and I'm sure the public want to know as well.
Well, I thought Amanda had explained it particularly well, but it's really just to do with the scheduling of the first council meeting of the new triennium. It can't be scheduled any earlier than the 4th of November. So even if the report was finished and all audited, it couldn't be received by council, and that is the legislative requirement that council receives it rather than it being finished.
look, I do apologise. I was reading it while I was listening to Amanda, so if I missed that, I'm genuinely sorry.
It's
May
okay.
I ask?
You are normally very good at multitasking, Councillor Hopkins, but we'll let you away with it today.
Nice of you to say
Yeah,
so.
you have another question.
May I, just one question, just apropos of the figure on depreciation, and again, possibly as much for the public's interest and information as our own. Under financial results, there's a reference to expenditure being 3 million higher than budgeted, largely due to higher depreciation and personnel costs. Now, people focus on those, and they've been subject of questions at councillor candidate meetings. But what emerges later on is that the depreciation appears to be principally related to the property increase of 50 million. So do we have a figure for the personnel costs, and do we have an explanation? Are they redundancies or unexpected employments or whatever?
Yeah, so the personnel costs haven't changed since the figures I gave in the July PAR committee, which I don't have to hand right now. But yeah, we did speak about that. It's probably for the last 6 months of the year, it's been over each month when I've come and spoken to the PAR. So we had a significant transformation, significant amount of staff leave. And so when they leave, there was the various employment related payouts, like paying for built up annual leave and those sorts of costs. So it was a bit higher. It's around the middle of the year that there was a peak, and that didn't flatten out by the time we got to 30 June.
Yeah, you might recall, Councillor Hopkins, that I was pretty vocal about personnel costs at the previous PARs, and Amanda and the team brought some figures to us in July and some rationale behind it. And whilst none of us were particularly comforted by the numbers, we did get a really clear understanding of what they were, so we could dust those off again if helpful. But I took comfort in the commitment that we were going to see a significant reduction in personnel costs going forward over the coming years as a reflection of the transformation work that had been done, and I committed to keeping a good eye on that.
Oh, look, I think the comfort you took is shared by all of us, Mr. Chair. But various figures have been bandied around it. As I say, at candidates' meetings, I think there was a question that suggested there was close to $1 million over budget in terms of personnel costs. And if we look at this document here, expenditure was over 3 million higher than budgeted, largely due to higher depreciation and personnel costs. But then you go down 2 paragraphs, depreciation is almost 3 million higher. So there's clearly a margin between almost 3 million and over 3 million.
Yeah, and we
I'm just
do-
trying to establish the
Yep,
quantum.
and we've got it, and there's a very clear breakdown of it. I think that we could point any member of the public that was interested in seeing that to the public minutes from the PAR meeting in July. And again, when the annual report is updated and finalised with property, plant, equipment and other bits and pieces, I'm sure we'll get some clarity around that too. But that July, the minutes from that July PAR meeting very clearly show the breakdown of personnel costs where they've occurred. And I think we also mentioned at the time there was a contractor line that we wanted to see actually reflected as personnel costs as well, because just because they weren't staffed didn't mean they weren't personnel costs.
I agree with you, and I think it's a key take home for everyone is that it was principally associated with redundancies. If I may just ask one additional question, and I don't understand this, it's something I'm not familiar with. Page 16, there's a reference to the 3 water assets value increasing by 9.6% or 9.6 million or 2.6%. Based on Statistics New Zealand's Capital Goods Price Index. Can somebody tell me what that Capital Goods Price Index is?
Yeah, so it's like CPI, inflation rates based on a basket of goods. So for that capital price one, it's to do with a basket of capital increases, like expenditure on fixed assets by businesses all across New Zealand throughout the year. So yeah, it's just taking, so it's quite specific to waters. You can get all of this information to any level of detail that you want from Statistics New Zealand. So we went in and grabbed those indices. So it's like, think of it a basket of waters assets, what it's cost people to produce across New Zealand this year. And we've used that index to be able to apply it to the value of our waters assets right now to see if it was independently revalued, what would be the sort of increase, what would the numbers look like? So that's why we've done that, to see if there's a material change, whether we needed to go to the full cost and effort of having a full valuation. So that's
so this
the
is
best information, independent information we can get.
So we wanted a proxy. We wanted to be able to create a fair value. The best way to do that is to go and use a generic indicator. That's a great explanation. It's the CPI for water assets.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No. Thank you, man. I know there's an awful lot of work that's gone into the annual plan to get it to its current state. And I thank you and the whole team for the work that you've done, especially given the resource and competing pressures that you are under. And I look forward to PPE going in there so we have even more. Sorry, did you have a question? I was really
Just
hoping to wrap
one
this
little
up.
question. Yeah, so I was just reading again through the annual plan. I wouldn't say I read the last one, but in a lot of the breakdown of the balance sheets, it says internal charges and overheads applied. Is that a formula, or is that a cost of what, insurances, power, heating? What exactly is that?
It can vary by department. So there's a lot of direct costs that we can accurately allocate to a department. So like building space is per space used. And insurance, it can be specific to their assets and that sort of thing. And employee time can be timesheeted specifically to however much time they spend working on a different department and things. And then other overhead costs, it could be just a percentage of the business. So say if waters is 30% of the business, they'll get 30% of the finance costs. So yeah, it can be, it's as direct as we can possibly get. And then anything that we can't directly allocate, we try to do it in a fair manner based on staff numbers or percentage of the time used.
So that's over and above wages and salaries.
If you think about it in terms of the finance department, because that's an overhead cost. So my team's salaries and wages are included in that, plus our whole costs of operating. So everything that it takes to set up the finance department, our printing, our power, our share of the insurance and stuff. So that full cost is the overhead cost that gets allocated out. So it includes my salaries, because we don't have an income source. So we get split to other departments to cover the cost of us. Does that make sense?
Excellent, thank you. And I'm not going to thank you again for the work that you've done because I've just done that already. But could I ask somebody move that we accept the annual plan as current form? Moved by Councillor McCone, seconded by Mayor Kircher. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried, and thank you, Amanda. It's a heck of a lot of work. We'll leave the talking stick with you again for agenda item 4, Treasury Strategy.
Mr Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
That interests me because you did have a specific question about the $10 million.
If you'll allow me to, that I just really was curious to know what the capital work due for payment in October and November 2025 was. That's a general statement, but is it water related or what capital work are we talking about for that 10 million?
It is a large variety of capital work. We have a lot going on at the moment. So I've touched on the 3 big ones, the event centre, the gallery and Kakinui Bridge.
Yes.
So there's some big invoices coming through for them. The last couple of months we have been able to cover them with our income coming in, but it just gets a bit too much in October. We have a lot of other standard water and roading renewals happening, and we're going to need to borrow for those couple of months before our next load of rates income comes in at the end of November.
Fair to say 75 or 80% of that 10 million is those the big 3?
Probably about 50% of it.
Are there any other major items? I mean, really big costs?
I can't think of anything like, say, over $1 million.
I think, it's particularly in the roading space. Really we do start cracking on with the work and as spring arrives and it becomes more favourable for a lot of that roading work to take place rather than the winter. So, September, October, that really gets underway, and the first couple of big water renewal projects are expected to kick off as well.
Thank you.
On that basis, I am happy to move the recommendation.
Excellent. Do I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Halale, all those in favour? Against? Thank you. And again, that's carried. We will now move on to the final agenda item of the day, agenda item 5, and that's confirmation of the previous minutes, kicking off on page 23 of the report. Do I have any questions or feedback? Moved by Mayor Kircher, seconded by...
There are 2 very minor grammatical corrections on page 26.
Great, we'll be able to deal with the governance team afterwards, but thank you. Seconded by Councillor Hopkins. All those in favour? Against? Again, that's carried. Thank you, everybody. With that brings us to the end of our agenda items for today. And so I'd like to thank everybody online and in the chambers and call the meeting closed. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Chair. Before you close it, I just want to thank you for the service that you've given the council over this term. Having an independent chair for this committee is really important, and you've brought a real work ethic and dedication to the role. And on behalf of all the council, thank you very much for that. And we look forward to hopefully you continuing that in the next term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It would be a privilege to come back. Thank you, and thank you everybody online. Have a good day.